I don't expect or ask you to believe me, for I would be crazy if I did, especially when my own senses betray me. However, I am not crazy, and I am certainly not dreaming. But tomorrow, I will die, and today I feel the need to unload my soul. My objective is to expose to the world, clearly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of domestic events that, in their consequences, terrify, torture, and destroy me. I will not attempt to expose them, as they represent, to me, little more than horror. To many, they will seem less terrible than banal. Perhaps some calmer, more logical, and less excitable intellect than mine will reduce these events to a mere common succession of very natural causes and effects. Since childhood, I was known for the docility and humanity of my character. My tenderness of heart was so remarkable that it made me the target of ridicule from my companions. I was especially fond of animals and was spoiled by my parents with a wide variety of pets. I spent most of my time with them, and I was never as happy as when I fed and cuddled them. This character quirk grew with me and, in adulthood, became one of my main sources of pleasure. Those who have cherished affection for a faithful and sagacious dog know the nature and intensity of the gratification derived from this unselfish and self-sacrificing love. I married young and was happy to discover that my wife had a disposition compatible with mine. Observing my partiality for pets, she lost no opportunity of obtaining the most agreeable ones. We had birds, goldfish, a beautiful dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. The latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to a surprising degree. Speaking of their intelligence, my wife, who had a slight tendency towards superstition, often alluded to the old popular notion that all black cats were witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious about it, and I only mention the subject because it happens to be remembered now. Pluto, that was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I fed him alone, and he accompanied me whenever I walked around the house. It was difficult to stop him from following me through the streets. Our friendship lasted several years, during which my temper and general character, under the influence of the demon of intemperance, underwent a radical alteration for the worse. Day by day, I became more moody, irritable, and indifferent to other people's feelings. Allowing myself to use intemperate language with my wife, I went further by offering her personal violence. My pets, of course, felt the change in my mood. Not only did I neglect them, I mistreated them. For Pluto, however, I still maintained enough consideration to restrain myself from mistreating him, while I did not hesitate to mistreat the rabbits, the monkey, or the dog when, by accident or affection, they came my way. My illness, however, grew on me, for what illness is like alcohol? Finally, even Pluto, who was now getting old and consequently somewhat irritable, began to feel the effects of my bad mood. One night, returning home drunk, I imagined that the cat was avoiding my presence. I grabbed him, and he, afraid of my violence, inflicted a slight wound on my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon immediately possessed me. I didn't recognize myself anymore. My original soul seemed to have fled my body, replaced by a more than demonic malevolence. I took a pocket knife from my coat pocket, opened it, grabbed the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes out of its socket. I blush, burn, and shudder as I write this reprehensible atrocity. When reason returned with the morning, I experienced a feeling half of horror, half of remorse for the crime of which I had been guilty. But it was, at best, a weak and ambiguous feeling, and my soul remained untouched. I plunged back into excess, drowning all memory of the act in wine. Meanwhile, the cat was slowly recovering. The socket of his missing eye presented a frightening appearance, but he no longer appeared to be in pain. He walked about the house as usual, but, as was to be expected, he fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart that at first I was saddened by this evident dislike of a creature who once loved me so much. But this feeling soon gave way to irritation, and, as if for my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perversity took possession of me. This spirit, which philosophy does not consider, is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, who has not found themselves committing a vile or foolish action for no other reason than because they knew they shouldn't do it. This spirit of wickedness, I say, has come to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable desire of the soul to vex itself, to do violence to its own nature, to do evil for evil's sake, that urged me to continue and finally consummate the injury I had inflicted on the harmless brute. One morning, in cold blood, I put a rope around his neck and hung him from a tree branch. I did this with tears in my eyes and with the most bitter remorse in my heart. I hung him because he loved me and because I knew he gave me no reason to offend. I hung it because I knew that in doing so I was committing a sin, a mortal sin that would put my immortal soul at risk, beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. On the night of the day I committed this cruel act, I was awakened from my sleep by the cry of fire. My bed curtains were on fire, and the whole house was on fire. With great difficulty my wife, a servant, and I escaped the conflagration. The destruction was complete. All my worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself to despair. I am above the weakness of trying to establish a cause and effect sequence between disaster and atrocity. However, I am detailing a chain of facts, and I do not wish to leave any link imperfect. The day after the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, fell. This exception was a wall in the middle of the house, against which the headboard of my bed rested. The plaster resisted the fire, which I attributed to the fact that it had recently been spread over this wall. A crowd had gathered, and many people were examining a specific part of it with great attention. The words strange, singular, and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if engraved in low relief on the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The print was made with truly wonderful precision, with a rope around the animal's neck. When I saw this, my admiration and terror were extreme. However, reflection came to my aid. The cat had been hanged in a garden adjacent to the house. When I heard the fire alarm, someone must have cut the animal from the tree and thrown it through the open window of my room, with the intention of waking me up. The fall of the other walls compressed the victim of my cruelty into the substance of fresh plaster, which lime, with the flames and ammonia of the carcass, then formed the portrait I saw. Although I readily explained the fact to my reason, if not completely to my conscience, it made a deep impression on my imagination. For months, I couldn't shake the cat costume. During this period, a feeling of remorse arose in me. I began to mourn the loss of the animal and search among the places I frequented for another similar-looking pet to take its place. One night, as I sat, half stupefied, in a den of infamy, my attention was attracted to a black object resting on the head of one of the enormous pig's heads that adorned the place. I stared at the top of this pig's head for a few minutes, and what surprised me was that I had barely noticed the object up there. I approached and touched him. It was a black cat, as big as Pluto and very similar to him, except for a white spot on its chest. When I touched him, he immediately stood up, purred loudly, rubbed himself against my hand, showing obvious affection. This behavior instantly captivated me. I asked the owner of the place if he knew who owned the cat, but he said he had never seen it before and that, as far as he knew, it didn't belong to him. I continued to pet the animal and, when I was ready to go home, it was willing to accompany me. He allowed himself to be guided, and once we arrived at my residence, he quickly became familiar with it and immediately felt at home. The cat quickly became a favorite of my wife, who, as I mentioned, had a strong penchant for such animals. As for me, I soon felt an aversion forming towards him. It was exactly the opposite of what I expected, but, perhaps predictably, the spirit of wickedness caused simple aversion to turn into hatred. I avoided the animal. A sense of shame and the memory of my previous cruelty prevented me from treating him with physical violence. For weeks I avoided him with unspeakable dread. It was not so much a dread of physical evil as an inexplicable and incomprehensible sense of horror. The growing aversion to this cat was exacerbated by one of its physical peculiarities that I have already mentioned: the white patch that covered almost the entire chest region. This mark, which at first was of indefinite contours, so gradually that it was with difficulty that my reason could assure me that I was not deceiving myself, assumed a form which I tremble to mention. It was now the image of a terrible, monstrous object, the gall. O melancholy and terrible machine of terror and crime, of agony and death. Now I was truly unhappy, beyond the suffering of the common man. A brute beast, whose like I so despicably destroyed. A brute beast had created a storm within my reach, the mere image of which was enough to inflict this unbearable horror on me. Neither during the day nor at night did I find peace. During the day, the animal would not leave me alone for a moment, and at night I awoke every moment from unspeakable terrors, finding the hot breath of the thing on my face and its vast weight, a discomfort that I did not have the strength to shake off, eternally pushing upon my heart. Under the pressure of these torments, what little goodness remained in me succumbed. Evil thoughts often came to consume me. I would frown at the mere sound of my wife's voice. Finally came the final and irreversible collapse, the spirit of wickedness. One day, accompanying me on a domestic task in the cellar of the old house that our poverty forced us to inhabit, the cat almost knocked me down the stone stairs. Enraged to the point of losing myself, I raised an axe and hid the animal's blow. But this blow was stopped by the hand of my wife. This impediment instilled in me an even more demonic hatred. I released myself from her grasp and, burying the axe in her head, left her dead at my feet. Once this heinous crime was completed, I immediately, and with complete deliberation, dedicated myself to hiding the body. I knew I couldn't remove him from the house, day or night, without running the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Several projects crossed my mind. Thinking for a while about which one would be best, I came to the conclusion that I would hide it in the cellar wall, the way monks in the Middle Ages bury their victims. The decision, therefore, was so easy. I knocked down a wall in the cellar, embedded the corpse inside, and later plastered the wall with mortar so that no human eye could detect anything suspicious. I was so successful that the work left no visible trace. I discarded all the materials I used into a makeshift grave, and when I was done, I felt certain that at least at this point I was safe. Days passed and the beast did not appear. I gradually regained peace and a sense of security. The monster, terrified by the horror of my violence, had fled, never to return. My happiness was supreme. My wife's murder didn't bother me. Many days passed, and the restlessness still didn't haunt me. The thought of concealment was successfully carried out. I wandered around the house, free from the cat's terror. On the fourth night after the crime, a group of police officers came to the house unexpectedly. I was calm. He answered all questions calmly. They did a complete search of the house. In the end, satisfied, they prepared to leave. My heart pounded in triumph. But one final detail attracted me. I wanted to provoke a word of triumph, to give just one answer to unmask his complete security. "Gentlemen," he said finally, "I am satisfied that you are certain of my innocence. I just want you to be even more convinced of this. This house that was mine, is well built." In an almost frenzied excitement, I struck vigorously with a cane the wall behind which stood the wife of my heart. But under the pressure of my action, a horrible sound rose from the wall, a scream, half lamentation and half triumph, as if the lips of hell were vomiting. My own body turned to ice. For a moment, the police retreated. In a second, dozens of hands were working on the wall. She quickly collapsed. The corpse, in an advanced state of decomposition, was exposed. Terrified, a hideous figure, with blood clotting in one of its eyes, lay over the body. I buried the monster in the tomb of the wife I had killed. The animal, in its revenge mode, reported me. The bitter misfortune was that I had sealed my own fate.